Today we're working on this 2019 Chevrolet Traverse with the V6 3.6 liter GDI motor. And we're going to be replacing the GDI injectors on this vehicle. Now, to begin with, there's a few steps we have to take to make sure that one, we're safe, and two, we have everything ready for the removal of the injectors. And that's going to include removing the battery or disconnecting the battery. And then we need to also depressurize the fuel system on this vehicle. Now, in our case, we're using a snap-on tool, and there's actually a specific function within the tool that allows us to depressurize the fuel system before we go and remove any connections to the fuel causing any pressure issues. So we'll do that. We'll get the depressurization done, we'll get the battery disconnected, and then we'll go from there. So now with our system depressurized, we've gone ahead and taken the top cover off. We got our oil filler cap off, and then we've also removed our hosing assembly and baffle that sits on top of our intake manifold. And now we can start working towards getting the manifold off and working our way to the injectors themselves. Now that we have our intake manifold and our throttle body removed, we can now remove the gasket and the insulator that are sitting on top of the fuel rails themselves. And as you can see, we now have access to our rails. One rail on the back side, and one rail facing us on the front side. We're now going to start working to get those rails and those injectors out. But first we have to come over to our inlet and outlet on our fuel lines that are going to be coming from and to the pump, sending that fuel to the rails to supply the injectors. And since we have access now to the fuel rails and the fuel lines, you can see we've easily pulled this fuel line off, and it's all one piece. It's going to be a 17 millimeter nut that's going to hold these on. They're really not on there that tight, so you can just use a wrench. But a big note to make here is this is not a reusable line. Once you remove this line, you will want to throw this away and have a new line to replace it with when you put everything back together. It's very important that you do replace this line. With all of our mounting bolts removed from the fuel rails themselves, we can now use our specialty tool on both sides in the middle to remove the rail itself. Now, it's important to use these specialty tools because it has a J-hook that goes on one side that mounts to this arm, and then the other side of the tool is going to go into the original mounting bolt. And what that's going to do is going to apply pressure both to the block and the rail, pulling it up at an even pace without bending the rail or the injector tips as you're bringing those out. So what we'll do is we'll turn these at the same time, and that's going to break free the injector rail. And now that we have the rail broken free, we used our specialty tool to break the injectors free from their ports. We can now pull the fuel rail out, but I will tell you, it's a lot harder than it's going to look when you first go to pull it out. There are a lot of things that you're going to have to kind of wiggle and shift out of the way to get the fuel rail to come all the way up. And then if we spin the rail over, you'll see there are two tabs here and here that just have a grommet attached to them. And you're going to want to remove those grommets in order to get the rail all the way out. But essentially, once you have those removed and you get the wiggling done, the rail will pull straight up. Now, one thing I do want to mention, if we spin this all the way over with the injectors facing at the top, if you were just going to replace the seals on this injector, you will still need a specialty tool to put the new seals on and get them mated to the grooves that they go in. And we do have a video additional that shows how that process is done. And now, using a combination of another specialty tool as well as a larger flathead screwdriver, we have removed one of the injectors to show, because it's very important to make this note on the seal. We pulled the injector out, and the old O-ring is still down inside of the housing. It's important to make sure whenever you pull that out, that old O-ring comes with it, and if it does not, we get the old O-ring out prior to trying to put the new injector in. It almost makes it impossible to get the new injector in if you don't remove the O-ring, but if somehow you were able to do it, you would then have double O-ringed or gasketed the injector, and you'll never be able to build pressure that way. So it's very important to make sure you get that O-ring out at the same time that you pull the injector itself. And with the injector out, we can now go and reinstall the new injector, and we'll do that for the other two injectors on this rail and then we'll go back and do it for all 3 injectors on the other rail, giving us 6 brand new injectors, brand new O-rings, as well as the new delivery lines that are going to be reinstalled. Remember in the beginning of the video, we talked about throwing the old line away. Here's that new line, and we are going to replace that new. Again, another important note, make sure you leave these rubber tips on these lines until the exact moment that you're going to put these lines in place. It's just a simple way to keep debris and other things from getting inside the line and causing any type of trash or contaminants getting into the new injectors. So earlier in the video, when we were removing the injectors, we talked about using a specialty tool as well as a flathead screwdriver to remove these clips that hold the injector onto the rail itself. Now we have these reinstalled, these new injectors. However, we do want to show you what you're going to be running into with this. So on the injector itself, when it goes into the housing, it's going to have this retaining clip that pops on and locks the injector into the rail. You basically have a tab on either side as well as one in the middle. And that tab is going to lock into place on this clip, and it's going to keep the injector from moving around. Now, to get that on there, we'll go back to the specialty tool. And what's great about this tool is, you have a lot going on trying to get this injector in, lined up in the right spot. So holding and maintaining the position of that clip is difficult enough as it is. With this tool, there's actually a magnet inside of the clip side. So you'll take your clip, you'll put it in backwards to where it holds on to the magnet, and then when it comes time to lock it into the injector, you'll have this clip already into the tool. You'll place it onto the rail here, and then the back side is going to apply pressure to the rail itself right here. And once you have it lined up correctly, you'll be able to squeeze the tool and pop that clip back on, retaining the injector into the rail. That way we have a proper seal and it'll have proper function when the vehicle gets ready to run again. And now with our injector rail replaced with 3 new injectors, prior to installing that rail, we're going to clean the injector ports. That's a specialty tool that comes with 2 different components. We're going to have a brass, somewhat pipe cleaner looking tool that's going to shine up the port where the injector is going to go in. And once we have that done on all 3, we're going to remove the pipe cleaner style brass tool, and we're going to add the other tool that comes with it, which is going to be a brush, to make sure that we don't have any debris or anything else within that port. Just cleaning those ports up very nice so that we get a perfect, accurate seal with those new injectors once that rail goes in. Again, keep in mind, these rails are basically perfectly form-fitted. There's really not a lot of wiggle room or adjustments that can be made. So the cleaner the area and the better the situation for adding the rail back in, the better off you'll be. So make sure you follow this step in this process so you're not struggling to get that rail back in once you've done all the new injectors on the rail itself. Now that we have the new injectors reinstalled onto the rail, we can now guide the rail back into place. And again, we've already cleaned those ports out so we know we're safe there. We don't have any debris in the system. We get that rail back in place, we'll get it locked back down, and then we'll do the exact opposite. We'll go backwards and go to the other side of the engine and pull the other rail and replace those 3 injectors. That way we have a completely new fuel injection system on this vehicle. Now again, once we have both completed, we're going to replace that fuel supply line from the pump to the rails. Since that was a throwaway piece and we got to put a new one on each time, we'll replace that. We'll get the pump replaced, and then it's just a simple process of getting the rest of the components back in place, such as our intake manifold, our throttle body, all those components we removed to gain access to the rails themselves. We'll put those back on. We'll get our battery re-energized, and then all we need to do at that point is put the key in the ignition, let it sit in the AC position for just a second so we can get some fuel running up to the pump, and then we'll start cranking. Now, it will take a few seconds to get the car to turn over because you do have to build some high pressure fuel in that high pressure fuel pump. So let it crank, and if it keeps going for 10 to 15, 20 seconds, back off and try it again, and you will quickly get that pressure built up to the high pressure fuel pump, and that'll feed that fuel to the rails, and we'll get these injectors running like brand new. And hopefully now you have a better understanding of what it takes to replace the injectors on this 3.6 liter GDI motor.